Okay, and I want to say thanks to Erica, who's driving the slides today. She works with me. If you're not familiar with the Port of Seattle, we have a 5-member commission. I'm one of those. We're elected at large in King County, and it's a part-time role. And so we have we hire smart people to support us. And Erica just joined the commission. She had an amazing career leading up to this, and the thing that I love about working with Erica is that she and I both have a passion for renewable energy and the environment. And so even in our first month, we've had a ton of fun advancing that. And then I also want to introduce Christina Billingsley, who's here on the call with us too, and who I've gotten to work really closely with on matters related to the Duwamish Valley, which the Port of Seattle has a long and unfortunately checkered history with that river. And this generation of the Port of Seattle is really dedicated to going back and fixing some of the legacy impacts that we've had, and also really looking to embrace those relationships with the community. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. But I have a little bit of a slideshow that is a very pared down version of kind of what I use when I'm speaking to groups around the county, just as a refresher about what the port does. I always say when I'm out campaigning that running for port commission is somewhere between like dog catcher and school board in terms of people's awareness of who we are and what we do. And so I think I can kind of quickly walk through some of that. And then I want to leave the lion's share of the time for questions, and also to, the presentation itself doesn't directly address the op-ed piece. I hope you get a sense of kind of my value structure as I go through it, and what was behind the op-ed itself. I really like dialogue too. So I hope we have a fair bit of time, and I want to hear from you, and also hopefully answer questions. So Erica, if you could jump to the next slide. We're going to just go through quickly mission, partnerships, and equitable recovery. Next slide, Erica. So for me, when I came into the port 3 years ago, I spent a lot of time in my campaign and then really in the early part of my tenure thinking a lot about the mission of a port. And this is where I can get totally down into the weeds, but I want to go back and say, when ports were formed in the state of Washington in 1911, with the Port of Seattle being the original port, we now have 75 of them. The purpose was really driven by a populist message of these are entities intended to pull back power from what was at the time a sort of duopoly on the Seattle waterfront, controlled by railroads, and preventing farmers in Eastern Washington and workers on the waterfront from a just treatment, essentially. And so they banded together and got it pushed through the legislature. And since then, there's been 74 other ports that were formed. We're proudly the first and far and away the largest. I have seen that as our guiding light all the way through. And so when we talk about our mission, for me, it's really about shared prosperity for folks in our region and doing so in a sustainable way. I think one of the key metrics that we try to look at all the time is how many well-paid, meaning-bearing jobs do we provide to our region. And so if we can go to the next slide. And in that, we also have, I think, a surprising impact on everybody's daily lives too. So we think about, the Port of Seattle is SeaTac Airport, right? We own and manage the 8th largest airport in the United States. We all use that when we want to go see loved ones, or when we need critical supplies that come by air cargo. We have a very significant air cargo business that surprisingly about half of which comes in on the passenger planes and what we call belly cargo. And then of course we're the maritime port as well, the fishing industry, the cruise industry, the shipping logistics industry, and a significant shipbuilding industry as well. And that's both building the ships and designing the ships. The naval architecture cluster in Seattle is one of the largest in the world, and far and away the largest in the United States. And then, of course, we have recreational boating too. So you think of Shoal Bay and Fisherman's Terminal, the marina there, and our new marina, Salmon Bay. And then we also have marinas down on the southern end of Elliott Bay as well. So that's a part of our portfolio as well. Next slide. The numbers are quite striking when you think about it. But again, I think the most important one is that we provide 121,200 jobs as a result of port activities. The vast majority of those jobs are represented jobs. They're union jobs, whether it's longshore workers or baggage handlers or the 1,000 direct employees of the Port of Seattle that are trade unionists as well. Next slide. We are really, in recent years, I think we've really took up the mantle of being an innovative public agency. And I'll talk about a few of them on the maritime side and on the aviation side. I'm really proud of these three examples here. The Maritime Innovation Center, that building on the left, is a new design that actually we just debuted about a month ago that will refurbish the oldest building on port property, which is the Seattle Ship Supply Building on Fisherman's Terminal. It's a 1914 building. And we have partnered with the state of Washington to refurbish this historic site. And it will house our Maritime Accelerator, which is that middle graphic, which is a program we started a year ago to attempt to provide an incubator for maritime-related sustainability businesses to gestate them in our ecosystem and hopefully then get them to take root in our maritime ecosystem. And with the addition of the building, we'll create that space where they can interact with each other. And I would encourage you guys to take a look at our website and see what some of the original 11 businesses in that cohort, the first cohort are. And now we have the second accelerator cohort growing. And there are things related to cleaning up the ocean, decarbonizing the ocean, mariner safety, really innovative uses of technology in the maritime space. So it's a really exciting thing to be a part of. And then my pride and joy in the first 3 years of my term is a couple of years ago, I started talking about the fact that we lack a regional maritime high school. We have a really extraordinary aviation high school. And so I started asking people why. And part of it was just sort of a problem of herding cats. It's a really diverse ecosystem, the maritime ecosystem, whereas aviation is sort of, you've got Boeing at the top of a pyramid and everybody else kind of falls in underneath Boeing. But with maritime, we have so many different areas of maritime that it was hard to get everybody kind of rowing in the same direction to get this thing going. But I'm really excited to announce that as of end of January, we recruited our first class of freshmen for September of 2021. The school opens in collaboration with Highline Public Schools. It's an extraordinarily diverse class, which was a part of what we were hoping to achieve there. And it's in our recruiting, we managed to get gender parity, which is a really important part for maritime high school, because so many of the legacy positions in maritime have skewed male, of course. Next slide. Sustainability, along with innovation, is a driving part of our mission as well. And there's a bunch of examples of this. I think some of the really fun ones to talk about are our waterfront electrification plan. So we went to the city of Seattle and said, we want to craft a plan to remove fossil fuels from the waterfront as quickly as possible. And our extraordinarily smart subject matter experts on both sides sat down and said, how can we do this and what would it cost? And so we have a 30-year plan to remove all of it. And that's making sure every ship plugs in, making sure there's every forklift and crane and truck that comes onto port property and waterfront property is all electric or zero emission. And one of the really innovative things that an internal expert at the Port of Seattle came up with was, as we originally priced out how you plug in all those ships that come to Pier 66, which is one of the cruise terminals during the cruise season, they require huge amounts of power. And also, if you don't plug them in, the pollution is significant coming off those ships. And so wanting to be able to get shore power to that terminal. And we had priced it out running a cable down Alaska Way, and it was an extraordinary amount of money. It was $33 million because we would have had to tear up that whole roadway. And one of our internal engineers said, well, why don't we do a submarine cable? And they started to price it out. And at this point, the price tag for that is between $1.5 and $3 million. So an extraordinary amount of savings to be able to power that and reduce that pollution. And then the Blue Carbon Project is a carbon sequestration project. So pulling all that carbon out of the atmosphere is going to be a key part of reversing some of the impacts of climate change. And we've been researching that internally. And one of the ways that we know that we can do that is through planting eelgrass and kelp in estuarine areas and other parts of the Puget Sound where they will grow successfully. So we've been in collaboration doing a pilot project up on the north end of Elliott Bay, by Elliott Bay Marina, in areas of the bay that we control. And so far, so good. We're seeing good results. We had some fits and starts as we lost some of the original plantings, we think, to maybe some marine mammal, we think, that was eating it, but we figured out how to get over that. And we think it's a project that we could really scale up in collaboration with other entities around the Puget Sound. Next slide. Of course, one of the biggest parts of our budget each year is our capital budget, building new things. And Terminal 5 is the big project for us. It's a $500 million project right up against West Seattle to refurbish one of our main container terminals to accommodate the big ships that the three main shipping alliances that ship 97% of all global shipping cargo. And these ships are getting so big, they need bigger wharfs to manage them. The good news is it means that we have fewer ships transiting the Puget Sound, which means less vessel noise for the orcas, and they're newer ships, and so they're much more efficient. We're going to bring that online, the first phase online this coming year, and then the second phase sometime in 2023. Next slide. At the airport, which is about 70% of our revenue in any given year, we have two big projects opening this year. The first is it's a continuation of the North Satellite modernization, which is that it's now essentially all Alaska Airlines, and the International Arrivals Facility, which is replacing the basement customs terminal that if you've ever flown into SeaTac internationally, you've had to pass through. That's a facility from the early 1970s that is simply too small and out of date to be able to accommodate the amount of traffic we have going through there. And so that picture on the right is, that's not a rendering, that's a real picture of the new International Arrivals Facility. I know most of us have not been out to the airport much this year, but if you go out there now, you'll see that building, and that's set to open this year. It is a beautiful facility, and it's such a great welcome mat for our region as folks come to visit Seattle from overseas. So I'm really proud of that one. Next slide. The big nut to crack for environmental sustainability at the Port of Seattle is aviation. Globally, aviation represents about 2% of GHG emissions, but it's going in the wrong direction. As we look at how different areas of global emissions, aviation is trending up, and by 2050 could be as much as 7 to 10% of global emissions. And so we have to figure out how to reverse that trend. So along with my colleague Fred Fellman, we have been working on something called Sustainable Aviation Fuels, which is a renewable fuel source for planes, non-fossil and sustainable in that we're not simply tearing up virgin rainforest and planting palm oil to then fuel jets, but we're looking at sources that are renewable and would prevent the emissions. And what we're finding is that it would also prevent a certain percentage of local air particulate, which is a concern for our neighbors around the airport. And the really exciting thing is we're pairing now with King County to see if we could use municipal solid waste, the garbage that doesn't make it into recycles or compost, and use that. We send off to Cedar Hills, or here in Seattle, we actually send it down to a dump on the Columbia River to capture that and turn that into fuel for our planes. The other big project that I'm extraordinarily proud of the environmental team at the Port of Seattle put together is the use of renewable natural gas at SeaTac for all of the heating and shuttle bus fleet that takes people to the rental car facility and also employees out to the parking lots. And it's a $23 million contract to use all renewable natural gas instead of liquefied natural gas or fossil gas. And It's a significant expense for us, but we got the airlines on board to include it in part of their rates and charges. And no other airport has done anything like it. And so it is a huge step forward, and it's one of those model projects that we hope other airlines will take up. And then finally, the Miller Creek salmon habitat restoration. There's a small creek that runs by the airport and had been unfortunately modified, and a culvert had broken. And so the salmon were cut off from their spawning grounds. And so we helped to match city of Burien funds to restore that, that habitat and ensure that salmon are able to use that again. Next slide. Go ahead to the next slide. So one of the things that we're able to do as a public agency is support efforts around in areas where we operate to try to fulfill our mission. And so going back to that first slide, if our mission is really to create great jobs for folks in the region, we want to think about how do we reach the communities that have been historically furthest from economic justice. And so in our area around the airport, it's one of the most diverse areas of King County. In fact, the school districts are two of the most diverse school districts in the nation. It's also an area that has unfortunately been hard hit by industrial activity. And as a result, we have put together a number of programs to address both economic recovery post-COVID, which has hit immigrant and refugee communities particularly hard, young people particularly hard, people of color particularly hard. And so targeting support to those communities. And then in our South King County environmental grants, we're supporting community efforts to address environmental projects that they have prioritized in their own community. Next slide. And go to the next one. And we're wrapping up here. We have realized that as a port agency, we have certain constraints. We can't do everything that a city could do or a county could do because our charter is constrained by that. But we also recognize that we have certain expertise in areas that we can wade into that the county or the city might not be capable of wading into. And so one of those areas is the Opportunity Initiative that we kicked off post-pandemic when we realized a lot of the youth employment, 16 to 24-year-old employment, had been hardest hit by this. That was where the highest rates of unemployment were post-pandemic. And so we were able to backfill some of the budgets that had been lost by employers and nonprofits that were employing them. And then we have had an outstanding high school and college internship program that I wish I could take credit for, but predated me and has grown over the last few years. And we will go back to roughly 150 paid internships at the Port of Seattle each year. But even through the pandemic, we've been doing them virtually to make sure that in particular, female students and students of color are getting exposed to careers in maritime and aviation, and also in construction and green jobs. Those are the 4 areas that we really focus on. Next slide. We spend a lot of time thinking about workforce development. We talk about what's called the silver tsunami, where the boomers are moving out of the workforce. We're trying to attract new entrants to the workforce to our areas, the 4 that I've talked about. And then also recognizing that tourism is a huge part of what the Port of Seattle supports as a conduit of commerce. And it has been so hard hit. Hospitality and retail sectors around tourism have been decimated by the pandemic. And so we have actively supported, both with funds and expertise, some programs to help bring that back after the pandemic ends. Next slide. And finally, part of what we recognize at the Port of Seattle is that as a huge employer, we have 2,000 employees, and as part of this ecosystem of 121,000 jobs, we both need to show the way internally on issues of racial justice and other questions of equity, but then we also need to demand it of our vendor partners, of the employees and concessionaires at our facilities. And so we have done we've taken a series of steps, the most, I think, important of which was to create an Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, led by a division director who reports directly to our executive director. And that has then helped us to, in the wake of the pandemic and also of the racial justice protests this year, to really say, we aren't just going to paper over this, we're going to take it really seriously. And we've got internal capacity to do a lot of this. So I'm this year co-chairing a police accountability task force that is addressing, we have a 110 member police force at the Port of Seattle. And so we're making sure that we are up to date on all of the latest use of force best practices, as well as making sure that in our hiring and in our use of force on the ground that we are, that we're addressing any issues of systemic racism there. And then I'm also on the Equity and Workforce Development Committee, and we're doing an internal review of our equity practices. And that also spills over into things like diversity in contracting and hiring at the Port of Seattle. So I'm going to wrap up there, and I don't know how much time I took. I probably took 45 minutes, but I hope I left some time. I'm a classic politician. I can't stop talking. So I hope that was useful to folks, and I'm not too constrained by time, so I'm happy to stick around as long as you want me, but I also know that you have another speaker, so kick me out whenever you're ready.
Okay. We have about 10 minutes. I think from the time that we allotted. So yeah, we'll leave it open to questions.
And everything's fair game, internally at the port, or about the op-ed that I wrote, or how cute my kids are, anything like that. Okay, oh, sorry, I don't have chat open. Let me open that up, see if there's questions in there. Oh, thanks, Brett. Appreciate it.
So you're taking live questions?
For sure.
All right. So, you know, when you were talking, you mentioned how the port is investing in local communities. You mentioned Duwamish, you know, in Rainier Beach area, we could use investment in economic development, creating more opportunities for our residents. How do we work with someone like yourself to build that bridge and make some change?
Well, I'm a bit of a Gurmai Zahalai fanboy, and also he's become a good friend as we have collaborated on a number of projects together. And I would say that for the parts of your community that he represents, you have a truly astounding elected official in Gurmai. He gets it in so many ways. And so kudos to you guys. He and I have started working on ways that essentially what I have to do is I have to figure out where a project might dovetail with the work that we do. Whereas a county or a city can really do, you know, they have a much freer reign to expend their resources. We really get our hands slapped if, say, we get into housing or too far into education policies that veer away from the careers that would make sense at the Port of Seattle. But there's almost, because we are so intimately connected in so many different parts of our economy, I have been creative in finding ways to do that. So, for example, we met about 6 months ago with Doug Baldwin Jr., who is a former Seahawks wide receiver and is starting up a community center in Renton. And Gurmai and I are looking at ways that we can support programming there. So the city of Renton, King County, the Port of Seattle want to make sure that that is a space where youth are able to go and get onto that first rung of the ladder to a career. And so we've got tons of expertise from the port on how to build those pathways. Gurmai comes from the perspective of wanting to help that community center get off the ground. So it's that kind of collaboration that I think will be really effective. Bob asks, how's the partnership with the Port of Tacoma working? Bob's referring to something called the Northwest Seaport Alliance, which is our, it's an accord between the Port of Seattle and Port of Tacoma on all international cargo, on international maritime cargo. and it's been working really well. We celebrated our 5th anniversary. It's what's helping us build T5. Tacoma was able to refurbish something called the Washington United Terminal. Major investments in consolidating terminals to manage the big ships, and then converting other terminals into higher and better uses for that maritime cargo focus. We are different constituencies, King County and Pierce County. So there are times where I'm pushing really hard for a sustainability initiative, but my colleagues in Tacoma maybe want to pump the brakes a little bit. Something like that will come up occasionally. But my work style is collegial and collaborative, and I feel like we can usually bring them along in areas where we could use that support. But for the most part, I think it's been a pretty successful experiment in recognizing that apart we were racing to the bottom, and that was going to hurt our ability to provide good living wage jobs and make sure we did things that were important in terms of stormwater management and just environmental sustainability generally. But together it's hard to avoid us. And so it's been pretty effective, I think.
So I have a question for Ryan. This is Maria McDaniel. Thanks for coming. Luckily, when I was working at McKinstry, I had the opportunity to tour the North Satellite because we were doing work there. So that was great. Also, you mentioned the capital projects and the maritime trade and the airport activities. Due to COVID, how much has that impacted your capital projects for 2021 to 25?
We made a really conscientious decision early on. So I'm a Keynesian myself. I believe that in a downturn, government really should do its part to ramp up spending to be counter-cyclical to a downturn economically, that's a really wonky way of saying we pushed hard to make sure we kept as many people safely employed through the pandemic as we possibly could. And so the first thing we did was we pulled together our contractors, our labor partners, and our management. And we said, what needs to happen to make sure folks are safe, but then we can proceed. And we basically then said, and we will backfill the cost difference. So if you need extra equipment, if you need new tools, because you can't be sharing tools anymore, so that everything from like PPE, if you need to set up a new station for monitoring as folks come in the door, we will backfill all of the costs on that. And it means that you can't have as many people in confined areas. So there was a whole number of considerations that went into how to continue these projects. The one exception was we looked at projects and said, has the pandemic so significantly changed something permanently that a project is now obsolete? And there were a couple of smaller projects, particularly on our economic development side, not related to the marinas or the airport directly, where we said, let's just put a pause on that. And the most notable one was on T46, which is the terminal right up against downtown Seattle. We had put out to bid we had put out a request for proposals for a new cruise terminal to replace part of an old one, and that would be fully electric. And we paused that initially, and now have just taken it off we've shelved it for now. So there's no plans to move forward on that at this point. And that is without a doubt as a result of COVID. Anne asks, when will truck electrification be required for drayage and other trucks in the Port of Seattle? Very good question. We are about to approve something called the Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy, which is a renewal of an agreement between the Port of Tacoma, Port of Seattle, and Port of Vancouver to clean up the airshed, basically. And I think we're into our 3rd iteration of it now. And it covers the entire airshed from the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca all the way up to about midway up Vancouver Island and the entirety of Puget Sound. And so we take an inventory of all of the emissions related to those areas, and then we each port pledges different ways to reduce the emissions associated with our operations there. And in the first iteration, we saw a 90% reduction in diesel particulate emission, mostly because of a change in the use of fuels and because of a ban on trucks older than a certain year. The next step will be toward zero emission trucks. And it's not going to be in this Northwest Ports Clean Air Strategy. And Anne, it's unfortunately related to that tension between the Port of Seattle and Tacoma. I pushed really hard to see if we could get there by 2035. But the Tacoma wasn't ready for that yet. So we're going to try to push to an accelerated timeline on some other things. There's actually, because of the amount of emissions that come from the ocean going vessels, that's really the big fish. That's what we want to try to get. And it would actually, from a greenhouse gas perspective, it would be a much, much bigger deal. Local air particulate, that is the concern for me and why I pushed really hard to get that done. I tend to think, and I'm an optimist at heart, I tend to think that technology is going to lap us here pretty quickly. That, PACCAR, our local big truck manufacturer, they already have prototypes of all electrics running on the roads. Volvo has one. I just think that those are going to be, the cost of ownership of those is going to be lower than the cost of ownership of fossil fuel trucks. And so fleet owners will just start switching them out, and we won't need to tell them to do it. They'll do it because it makes economic sense for them. So, there's a little bit of a push pull there, but I'm really hoping that by 2035, we will have done that. The next question is, what are the types of jobs and career paths that Maritime High School will link to? It is intended to be a full spectrum high school, where I refer to it as T2-4 high school, trades, 2-year and 4-year pathways. So if you want to go directly into vessel operations or commercial diving or longshore, you will get certifications and skills training at the Maritime High School that will give you a head start going into those trades related careers. If you're going into a 2-year career in something where you need an associate's degree to get it, it will prepare you for that. But if you want to go to California Maritime Academy, or you want to go to MIT as a engineer to become a naval architect, it's going to prepare you for those careers as well. And so the career pathways that we're looking at right now: commercial diving, naval architecture, marine law and policy, vessel operations, aquaculture, one related to maritime sustainability. We're not sure exactly how that one's going to shape up, but honestly, we're trying to build a place that everybody's going to want to send their kids to. And my kids are 10, 7, and 5 right now, and I hope they all go. So hopefully by the time they get there, we'll have each of the pathways set up. Does the port partner with SPU or SCL in regards to internships? Seattle City Light and Seattle Public Utilities, is that what you're referring to? Maria? Yeah.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
And this is going to be our last question. Then we got to move on to our second speaker.
Great. We do not partner directly with them on internships. We have our own internal partnership. One thing we have been working to try to do is encourage our ecosystem, the private industry around us, to do more of these internships, because we know that one of those rungs on the ladder to moving into a career is exposure to it. And I want to emphasize that it's paid internships that are really needed, not just volunteer internships. That, for the kids that we're targeting, they can't afford not to work over the summer or on weekends or after school. So making sure that they're paid is a critical part of that. I will say that I have had the opportunity to work really closely and with Christina and others on some really exciting prospects for collaboration between Seattle Public Utilities and the Port of Seattle as they build out a stormwater facility. We might be able to partner with them on that. And so we do have good cross-agency relationships there, but no, we don't do direct internship stuff. So
Thank you.
I'm gonna drop my my 2 points of contact. the one will be my port address, which if you have anything related to port, just send me an email at that address. And then I'll also put in just my, my political address so you can reach me if you have any questions about politics or that op-ed that aren't specifically related to the port operations, things like that. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And I didn't see Dorothy Driver on here, but I want to say thank you to Dorothy for the invitation in the first place.
Yeah, I was the one that had the question about the Maritime High School. So thank you.
Oh, great, Dorothy.
Commissioner Calkins. Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, Ryan and Erica and Christina.
Bye, Christina.
All right. And great. So our next speaker joining us is Michael Gordon. He is a fellow South Seattle resident and entrepreneur who is dedicated recently to improving the safety at the Rainier Beach Safeway and its parking lot. He's going to talk a little bit about the recent surge in violence during the pandemic and specifically in our neighborhood and efforts from city and local organizations to address that. And my understanding is that, Michael, you are at Safeway right now, and there was a meeting with the police tonight. Are you okay with us recording this and posting it to our YouTube channel so that members who can't be here tonight can see it later? If not, that's totally fine too. You're muted right now, though.
You know, back when we used to talk when you're on mute, we made everyone drink a sip of water to stay hydrated. Such a common thing now when I was doing. Sure, you can record it. You know, one thing that I've learned in the past month is that being in the public spotlight is not always the most effective way to get work done. So, but feel free to record it, absolutely. And thank you so much for the introduction. And Ryan, what a pleasure to get your insight in what the port is up to. What an incredible speaker. So my name is Michael Gordon. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a South Seattle resident. I really enjoy the neighborhood here tremendously. A little bit of background about myself. I'm born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. I came out here for college and whitewater kayaking, and I've been a serial entrepreneur, starting everything from peer-to-peer loan businesses for college students to fresh fruit stands, worked with like Tacoma General and retirement homes. And most recently, I worked in the cannabis ancillary space, founded a company called Kush Tourism, which you may have heard of. Which eventually grew into Kush.com, which I recently exited last summer. So I've taken this opportunity to, you know, take some breathing room, take some time off and give back to the community, and really enjoy what we have down here. There's so much potential. There's so much diversity and culture. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, Ryan is mentioning is like the investment in job opportunities and growth really is going to help preserve that. But one of the things that we're clearly dealing with is a lot of violence here. You know, the Rainier Beach Safeway parking lot, which is actually not Safeway's parking lot, but it's on the, I guess, the west side of the parking lot in front of the liquor store and over by the vet center. So Safeway gets a lot of tough love. People think they're responsible, but they've actually been a very supportive partner here in our community, donating to the Boo Bash, supporting Larry, and I think it's like a Fathers and Sons, a basketball program. And if any of you had the opportunity to join Tony Benton from Rainier Avenue's town hall last week, Safeway has really been doing a lot of work, and they're stepping up to the plate. One of the things that I found really frustrating as a community member is we continue to see this gun violence, and nobody wants it. And I'd say more often than not, it's not the people who are out there hanging out in front of the liquor store having a good time, but it rolls through, and it continues to be a problem. One thing I noticed, though, there's not a lot of proactive response. You know, we don't see police in the parking lots. We don't see officers. We don't see cameras. We don't see improvements. You know, where's the deterrent there? You know, at what point does this become too much? You know, how much is too much? And, you know, I kind of got to that point after I had tenants move into my house. I've got a little mother-in-law, and I said, hey guys, like, this is the best Safeway to go to. I was here last Friday because the other Safeway doesn't carry flowers worth a 5-year anniversary. And I came down here on a Friday night, and the Be Safe crew was out there in their blue jackets, making sure we all felt that we were in a safe space. But, you know, I told my tenants that, you know, you probably want to avoid the Rainier Safeway here on Friday nights, Saturday nights, and on holidays, because it's just not the safest place. You know, that kind of just is what it is. You know, born and raised in St. Louis, I understand these things, but, you know, the community grocery store, it's a center point of the whole neighborhood here. People have to go and get food for their families. And I personally think it's extremely important for it to be a safe place. So, within a month after the moving in, we had 3 shooting incidents down here, 2 in the parking lot, 1 over by the library. I think there were like 30 shots fired, and said, okay, well, what's going to be the response here? I'm past the point. This is too much, in my opinion. So started calling everybody. Feel very privileged to have connected with as many of you as I have at this point. And there's a lot of work being done. There's a tremendous amount of momentum happening. And I think that the community is ready for this change and wanting to not only improve in the safety of our neighborhoods, but in economic opportunity. A lot of the violence that we see down here, there's some good research that was being done. I believe it was a safe place for youth. And it shows that a lot of the violence down here is actually from the 25 and over age demographic. I hear a lot of times, we need to reopen the programs for the kids. They need a place to be, but it doesn't seem like they're necessarily the problem. And there are also some community organizations who are putting a tremendous amount of energy and effort into supporting the youth out here. RBAC is one of them. Community Passageways is one of them. Safe Passageways in the Boys and Girls Club. They're out there. They're engaging with the youth, and they have a lot of programs. I'll speak to just some of them. Not speaking on their behalf, but they have the Be Safe crew. They go to the high-risk areas, engage with the local community, try and make it feel like a more inviting space, and it seemed to be a very effective deterrent. There's an immediate response to any sort of shooting incident where community members reach out to the persons involved, and they try and de-escalate the situation and have that conversation to break these cycles of retaliatory violence. I believe RBAC is also doing they call it Safe Places, where they set up a booth and engage with community. And this is just scratching the surface. There's so many people doing so much work. And one of the things that I've learned in the past 3 weeks, it hasn't been much, there's a lot been done in the past few weeks, is that there are a lot of people doing a lot of things. But I feel like we're in this place where there's opportunity to work together and really make change, not just talk about change, but make change. And I feel that momentum. So it was about 3 weeks ago, when we had that last shooting at the Safeway, and I reached out to Nikita Oliver and said, hey, we increased violence. Can you help? What do you think? And she was so kind to reach out to Gurmai's office and to Tammy Morales, and the city organized a meeting around it very, very quickly with some of the community leaders here, RBAC, Community Passageways, members from Safeway, et cetera, et cetera. And it happened very, very quickly. And I know they had a second meeting recently. In addition to that, Tony Benton from Rainier Ave Radio hosted a town hall. I believe he's going to be hosting another town hall next Wednesday. I think it'd be a great opportunity to participate. You can ask questions directly to business owners. I don't know if he's marketed it yet, but I believe King Donuts will be there, the liquor store will be there, Safeway will be there, and hopefully more representatives as well, because these are a lot of the business owners who have a lot at stake and have the ability to make change. Also, just today, thanks to Aaron Goodman, and we reached out to Pete Holmes, who connected me with Joe, who is a South Precinct attorney liaison, connected me with Aaron Goodman. She just got a meeting scheduled. And the chief of police, Diaz, came down here with a couple of his folks. And in addition to that, we've probably about 10 or 15 people when we walk the parking lot wanting to see how we can improve the space through design. How can the city be a resource to us? Some of the things that we're mentioning, we can add more parking blocks, we can add speed bumps, better lighting, where are the cameras, how can we limit access? Putting pressure on the business owners who own Fovan to make sure that the space isn't covered in spray paint and that it's contained and that there's lighting. How do we make this a less inviting place for the crime and violence that we've seen here? So I'm so impressed, for all of this to be done in the past 3 weeks, I think it's just incredible momentum, and now's the time to build on it. If you want to see change in your neighborhood and you want to be a part of that, I really would encourage you to reach out and ask how you can be of assistance, because a little bit goes a long way right now, and any one person can make a tremendous amount of change and impact. I do want to give Safeway very specific credit. I know that her title escapes me, but she's with property management. And they were talking about how they can improve the space here and talking about investing in additional lighting, making improvements, and potentially even footing the bill for that, even though it would be the responsibility of the property owner. So, they're trying to keep our Safeway here safe for us. The woman who's in charge of that is absolutely fantastic. I'm so impressed. You can see her. She was a panelist on last week's Rainier Beach Town Hall, on the Rainier Ave Town Hall. And I'm excited to see what happens moving forward, because we need to do something proactive. We can't have shootings and then not see any response out here. I mean, the parking lot looks exactly the same as it always has been. You know, no concerns here. It feels safe, but it's not always. So what can we do moving forward? So I hope to be a bridge of information between all the organizations, between anyone who wants to help and help, you know, utilize resources. We ask fun questions. You know, what can we set up, like a drive-in movie theater over the other end of the parking lot? You know, can we paint murals? I said, well, what if we have a LGBT thing there with a big mural of two guys kissing each other? That doesn't, it's not a good place for violence. So any ideas, thinking outside of the box, what resources you have to bring to the table, whether it be helping paint a mural, you've got access to grants or connections within the city. Now's the time. The momentum is now. So I'd be happy to answer some questions, whatever it is I can. I'm pretty new to the scene here, but I've spoken with over 60 of the movers and shakers in the past couple of weeks. So pardon me while I read through the chats. And a lot of focus on good happening. We need to locate all call action landlords. Someone was talking about calling the absent landlord. So I'm under the impression that the owner of the faux van space or this parking lot is fairly new as the past few years, but he has been in communication with the SDIC and been doing a really good job about addressing some of their concerns. They talked about repainting the building over there, changing access points, and he's been receptive. I'm going to be reaching out to him as well to participate in the panel next week, which seems to have been a really effective way of motivating them, because they see how much the community cares. And I really encourage you to join that discussion. You can ask questions live, just like the meeting here tonight, because you might touch a heartstring, and really one person can make a tremendous amount of difference. Okay, how do I get back to the chat here? What do you see the role of SPD in improving safety? That's a really good question. Having just been on the heels of this meeting with Chief Diaz, one of the realities is the Seattle Police Department doesn't have the best reputation. All the violence that happened with the tear gassing and the rubber bullets downtown, especially communities of color where there's been, deep-seated distrust in the police, and rightfully so. It's difficult. They have a lot of bridges to rebuild. When you couple that with the slashing of funding, I believe you said they lost about 116 officers. And you put that in perspective and said that basically means we have enough officers only to patrol down to I-90, that there's not enough to go around. But they're looking at resources. I mean, the fact that they came down here for an hour and a half and had these discussions, they're taking it very, very seriously. I think that personal opinion here, I think SPD, has to work on rebuilding that relationship with the community down here, and that's done by being out here and not busting people who are shoplifting, but making sure that we have a safe place, because there's a lot of trust that needs to be built. Somebody mentioned bringing out the Panda car, that there was 2 officers who used to be here back in like 2014, 15, 16, and that was really effective. I think that's a great idea as well.
Michael, you're on mute again.
Wonder if he dropped off.
That could be.
Am I back?
You're back.
All right. This is a challenge. So apparently I can't look at all my tabs and talk at the same time. What I'll say is that SPD is taking a role, especially Mr. Diaz, in contacting all the resources he has available in the city. That includes the mayor's office, that includes the city of permit, the permits in the city, so that could have an impact on the faux van building. It could have an impact on what we can and can't do for improvements in the area, and really prioritizing that and pushing it through. So like I said before, the momentum is there, and we have so many people organized. I'm not even sure who else to tap in at this point, other than maybe Ryan from the port. So I do think that they're part of the solution, and it's a bit disappointing to see some of the backlash against SPD, because a lot of folks are saying, hey, we need more resources, we want to invest in this community. But they have such a tarnished relationship with SPD that it's no longer seen as a viable resource or a welcomed resource, and that's tough. That's tough. And I understand it, but I also know that they're asking for help, and they're certainly a resource. And I think I do believe that Diaz has a lot to offer.
So you don't have to read the chat, Michael. The next one was when, how will Diaz report back on permits, etc.?
That's a really good question. I do not have an answer to that. I know he seemed very serious and involved, and he's got a long-standing history of being involved in his local communities, whether it be through events or through coaching. So I think he's going to be responsive, and we'll certainly follow up. Erin Goodman is also a wonderful contact, and she's a go-getter. So I'd be happy to provide any sort of information as I can. Everyone's having a good time down here.
So, Michael, this is Maria. I have a question for you. Are you working with Detective Cookie at all?
I have not met Detective Cookie, but I see her name all over. I think she was one of the officers who may have been in the Panda car back in the day. Does that ring a bell?
I don't think so. She's really connected with the Boys and Girls Club in Rainer Vista, and she teaches chess. And one thing you might consider in the parking lot is putting down a chessboard so folks can play chess. And she might be willing to get involved as well.
Oh, I love that. I remember growing up as they had the big like human-sized chess pieces and chessboards. Little did I know St. Louis is a big chess hub. And we've got chessboards all over, kind of like New York City. I'd love to see that there. And I know just across the street, I believe there was a chess pieces there as well.
Yep. And then when you talk to officer, or I guess he's police chief, interim, ask him about the police department. Although they've lost 117 or so officers, they are working on redirecting resources to other areas so that they can respond as needed. And so the police can focus on the things that they're supposed to focus on and not surveillance and monitoring.
Yeah. Absolutely. Maybe I could ask you a question in return. How do you think that the police department rebuilds trust in the neighborhood?
It's going to take a lot of work. Growing up, born and raised in Seattle, you know, the police used to be friends. You know, we had our officers that were in the area, but I've seen over the years, growing up in Madrona, Mount Baker, you know, down South Seattle, it has changed. And I think it's changed because we have folks that have moved into the area, not from Seattle, not familiar with the culture, and they're just not capable of policing.
Yeah, I certainly understand. It takes a very special person to connect with the people out here. It takes work. That's their job. That's their job, is to be that support system for us. That's why we pay them our tax dollars, is to be our, you know, our guardian angels when we need it, and our best friends when we need it. And they have a lot of work to do. I agree. Do you have any other questions? You know, I hope that provided a broad overview of what's happening. Certainly waiting for an update from the city, from Gramai, and from from Tammy Morales as well. We've got the upcoming town hall meeting, thanks to Tony Benton, next Wednesday. And, you know, I'd be happy to share any updates with you guys directly of what's happening. Like I said before, I've kind of moved off of social media because the best work is done off of social media. But I do think it's important to keep everybody involved and in the loop, because you guys make all the difference.
Yeah. Thank you, Michael. I think my question was just what's next and how do we stay in the loop about what you are doing? I mean, you feel free to just like connect with us so we can continue to, you know, you can give us updates. If there's anything that we can do to kind of like help promote what you're doing, I think we would all agree that we would definitely benefit from that.
Wonderful. I so appreciate this. So I just dropped my email address into the chat box there. Feel free and send me an email anytime. I am, you know, gainfully unemployed at the moment and just dumping my heart and soul into our neighborhoods. So I will keep you in touch. You know, if you have any access to any sort of resources, whatever that may be, generally there's a way to take good spirit and energy and build into something productive out here. I love the idea of like chess with Detective Cookie. I'm all about that. I mean, I'm like, can we do it on Friday? You know, can we do it this weekend? And if we can continue, you know, one of the things I'm working with is how do we get leverage all the resources of all of the organizations locally, yourself included. So I appreciate you taking leadership in that, because, you know, it takes the whole community to address things like this. And there's no easy solution. But when you show that the city cares and that we as neighbors care and that we have the same mission here, you know, safety and opportunity, there's something happening right now, and it's really good, and it's about time.
So the town hall that you were referring to next Wednesday, that's hosted by RBAC?
That's hosted by Rainier Avenue Radio, so Tony Benton.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I would drop a link into the chat window, but of the last week, but I think my mic will cut out.
Got it.
But
we can do that.
Yeah, it was a really wonderful meeting. Maybe I could throw a little bit of drama. I think not everybody was happy about him calling it a town hall. And he's got this wonderful section at the last minute. He said, anybody can throw a town hall. Anybody can get the community together to talk about issues. And it's important, and we encourage you to do it because this is our neighborhood and we are frontline. So, big shout out to Tony for the work that he's doing. It's showing a tremendous amount of impact already in the movement that we're seeing with Safeway, because it takes people to spearhead any effort. And I think it's important to realize too that any big solution is made up of very small wins, many, many small wins. So as long as we're making marginal progress, that's a great sign. It's better than treading water and being stagnant. So, and we're seeing that happen right now. But I see the RBAC and the Be Safe crew. I see them out here. They're making an impact. I'm excited to see what the next domino is. Well, I think that's probably all the questions. I'll check chat one more time. Well, thank you so much for having me. Really a pleasure to be in the neighborhood here. Pleasure to chat with all of you guys. Feel free to reach out to me directly, and I'm at your service. So we want to keep everybody safe, happy, and continue to see prosperity in our neighborhood, because there's a lot of opportunity out there.
Michael, really quick, can you just tell
Sure.
us just a little bit about what is Kush Travel?
Oh yeah, Kush. So back in 2013, it was right when we had voted to legalize cannabis in the state of Washington. I started a tourism company called Kush Tours and Kush Tourism. We provided educational resources to travelers to develop cannabis tourism, and we took people behind the scenes. So you kind of like a winery or brewery tour, but in the cannabis industry.
Gotcha.
So, if you guys have any questions about the cannabis or hemp space, I'm very well versed in it. Although I did not, we weren't a plant touching business, if you may.
Great. Well,
there's a lot of enthusiasts out there nowadays. Sunday mornings, evenings, you name it. A good relief from the opiates that are out there in the world.
Well, thank you for joining us, Michael, and for sharing that. And thank you for giving us your email address. It's really great to have that contact, so that we can direct people your way if they have anything they want to offer and share, or just get in touch.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So that is kind of the end of what we need to do in the meeting. If anyone has any other announcements, now's the time to go for it. I'm going to stop recording now.